Hello. In this video, we'll be talking about the challenges that organisms face living in particular environments. So, it's okay. So here again is the big picture that an organism, form of life, exists as a separate entity from its environment, but has a dynamic interchange with it. This again is the big picture of Bio 207. Now, the challenges the organism will face depend upon the particular environment that the creature lives in. Okay? So then it's going to be important then to ask what features distinguish one type of environment from another. So these features can be divided into two categories. One, what we call abiotic factors, or non-biological factors. And the second is simply biotic factors, or biological factors. Now, we'll go into more detail about the abiotic factors later, but we can just say right now that you can divide them in roughly into two different categories, what we refer to as climatological factors related to climate, and the physical characteristics of the terrain, right? Whereas for biotic factors, these refer to competition, food availability, and predation. Things related to the presence of other creatures in the environment and the presence of food to eat, which of course food itself is being biological. Now, what is a useful way to characterize environments with respect to different organisms? And the way that biologists do it is using this term biome. Okay. Now, what is a biome? So a biome is referred to as a large distinctive complex of plant and animal communities, in other words, biotic factors, that are created and maintained by climatic, weather, and geological, soil, water, etc., conditions, or in other words, abiotic factors. So it's sort of the complex or constellation or grouping of all these different factors which defines a biome. Okay? And some examples of biomes then are things that you should be pretty familiar with, such as a desert, or tundra, like way in the north, or a tropical rainforest, a temperate deciduous forest, like what we see around here, around New York, or a tropical savanna, like you'd see in Africa. Now, how many different biomes are there? We should point out that this, to some extent, when we talk about how many different ones, it depends exactly how they're classified. And there'll be different classifications that exist there. But the one we're showing now is one that's more or less agreed by different types of different ecologists. And they're defined here. And what we can do then is zoom in on different areas. And you can see what's going on in South America, and Asia, Europe, and Africa. And then let's stop just for a little bit longer, linger a little bit longer on what's going on in our own continent, North America. Now, I apologize if this is a little bit hard to see, but what you can see here from this light green is the area that includes us here in New York, or along the eastern seaboard. And that is this temperate deciduous forest. Deciduous basically being trees where the leaves are lost, or leafy trees where the leaves are lost every winter. And temperate referring to basically sort of this in-between level of temperature. Now you can see other examples in North America. Okay. So, for example, this dark green streak here is the Appalachian Mountains. And you'll see there, as well as you start getting into Canada, what we refer to as a taiga, or boreal forest. That's the forest where it's more coniferous trees, things like pines, trees with needles, trees where the leaf or the structures aren't lost during the winter. Okay? If you go further north, you'll see way up here the tundra. This is where trees are more or less lost, and only much more limited vegetation is growing. If you go off to west of us, you'll see the temperate grasslands. So this is what you see in the Great Plains, as well as in the Rocky Mountain states where that are relatively low in altitude. In the Rocky Mountains, along with what you see up here in the Sierra Nevada, in Sierra Nevada and Cascades, going closer to the Pacific coast, is alpine areas. These are areas where there's extremely limited growth, and where you'll see no trees. Sorry about this endless switching of slides here. Where are we? Okay. Also, what you'll see down here in the southwest are the subtropical desert areas, like you'll see in Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Texas, etc. All right, so now, as I mentioned, a biome is characterized by a set of features that affect life, and those can be grouped into abiotic factors and biotic factors. All right, and what I want to do first is just focus for a second on biotic factors, so the biological related factors. Now, these, as I mentioned, are predation, competition, and food availability. And basically, they're the factors, again, related to living creatures within that environment. So, again, when we talk about biome, you could say it's somewhat different than what is normally thought of as environment, because the biome includes, again, these biological creatures. But I should point out that these, in terms of their impact on life, in terms of the challenge they provide to the surviving of a particular organism, these are going to be more dominant in less extreme climates, which also tend to be places where there is more life, where there's greater density of life, such as, for example, jungles. Okay, in jungles, these biotic factors tend to be more important to survival than the abiotic factors. And in particular, I'd say predation and competition. There's other organisms there that you're going to have to compete with to get food. And of course, there's many more creatures there that are trying to kill you. All right? So both of those obviously are challenges to your survival. So, contrast, in more extreme environments that have lower diversity of life, there will be less competition and fewer predators. And in those types of climates, abiotic factors are going to be more important. Now, this is relatively speaking. Of course, food could be a concern in both, let's say, more harsh environments and environments like jungles. But relatively speaking, abiotic factors are going to be more important. Biotic factors will be more important when there's more diverse life, and abiotic factors will be more important when there's less diversity in life. Okay. Now, these abiotic factors are really more of those are the factors of a biome that are of more interest in a course like Biology 20700, because we're talking about physiology, and places where the environments are more extreme make it more difficult physiologically to help maintain life. Okay, those provide more of a challenge physiologically. And as you'll see, what kind of makes the study of physiology interesting is precisely, looking at where environments provide the most challenge physiologically. That's where you can really learn more about how physiological mechanisms work. Okay, so what are these different abiotic factors? Well, I explained before that they could be divided into two categories related to climate. In other words, in terms of light, temperature, wind, rain, humidity, and wind, and then the physical characteristics of that land itself. So how available, and what's the nature of the water in that biome? What's the soil like? How much oxygen will be available? This particular factor here might be more important, as you can imagine, in biomes such as the sea, which, by the way, kind of neglected to point that out. The ocean and lakes are another type of biome. Okay, so I want to focus more on those and point out that, of course, that key point about in this class that you'll see is that particular biomes provide particular challenges to the survival or the organism. Of course, those challenges will refer to particular types of these abiotic factors, whether temperature is a challenge, or the availability of light for plants, or how much precipitation there is, how windy it is, etc. Okay? So here are some examples of abiotic factors and the organismic or physiological function that's affected. So in terms of light, obviously photosynthetic rates of plants is going to be affected. Temperature regulation could be affected as well. Temperature can affect metabolism. Let's try to get my point here. Temperature can, gosh, sorry. Okay, temperature can affect metabolism as well as water balance, how much water we're able to have to lose, let's say due to sweat. It also can affect photosynthesis. Gases, the availability of gases can affect how we metabolize, our rates of metabolism, and again, photosynthesis. Of course, photosynthesis relies on oxygen. God, I hate this pointer here. Okay, water availability is yet another abiotic factor, and you can imagine how that's important. And salinity of water can also be important. This is particularly true, of course, of creatures living in aquatic environments. Now, one thing here was when we talk about environment. Okay, so again, I showed you the picture of the creature living within. Whoops. Let me stop that. Sorry. The creature living within its environment. The biomes that we talked about biomes. We talked about these are types of living space that share similar types of these physical or characteristics, whether they be biotic and abiotic. But we should point out that really what we mean by environment is, strictly speaking, what exactly are the surrounds? What exactly is the nature of the physical environment that the animal is in? And this sometimes can be a little bit somewhat different from the sort of larger scale biome that we've been talking about. And this brings us then to the idea of a concept of microhabitat, namely that a creature might live, its immediate environment, its immediate surrounds might be different in nature than that's seen at a larger scale. So for example, a creature like a kangaroo rat living in the desert will actually be living in a burrow, which of course will be much darker and much less specifically hot than what's going on outside of it. Okay, so the deal is that when we're talking about the challenges for an organism, it's not necessarily the biome. It can be more specifically sort of what we call small environments that creature particularly lives in. All right. So one example, again, it's just taken from the desert. So mole rats, like these naked mole rats seen here, will always live underground. All right. So many of the challenges that creatures that live on the surface, these guys won't have to deal with. It'll also be true for insects, geckos. Certain creatures like geckos and most rodents are nocturnal. Okay, so they'll be active or going outside when it's night. So creatures like that, the fact that you're in a desert, that it's hot, might not be such an issue for them if they're only going out when it's nighttime. And one point here, of course, is very important, is that this is an example where size matters, where if you're a large creature, it's going to be harder or more difficult for you to find this microhabitat, something that helps keep you from being exposed to the outside environment. Maybe you'll find some shade, like a cave or something like that. For a smaller creature, one advantage there is that it's going to be more easy for you to find these microhabitats. And in that case, that is really defining you. Your ability to use these microhabitats and affects sort of the kinds of challenges that you're going to have to face. And let's stop.